So in walks this white guy, and I'm terrified. He's a country white guy, and we're talking and stuff like that. And he goes, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. So then he tells me what he did, and he definitely did it.
So I get cuffed, so I'm walking off campus, and they cuff me, and it was kind of funny. My friend was like, look, I'll get in trouble with my church if I get arrested, because the school told me they were calling the police. It's like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. So my friend left, and he was watching on a different, so I was walking off campus, and one of the cops gives it one of these, which is, I guess, maybe a police sign for cuff them. Because next thing I know, I got 4 cops spreading me and cuffing me for my criminal trespass and obstruction of justice or resisting arrest, whatever the other charge was. And I was kind of nice, so they put me in the back of a car, and it is one of those things when they got me to the Addled County jail, like, I was dressed like this, and I'm like, I'm not fit for prison. Like I like to think I'm pretty tough, but I'm like, I don't think I'm fit for prison. So literally, like, everyone else is like in the orange jumper and slippers, and I'm in there with my suede shoes on, and like, I'm sizing everybody up, because anytime someone would move, like, it was like, I was the youngest of 5, and so when one of my siblings moved, I was often twitchy. So every time a guy moved in the jail cell, I was like, ooh. And so they knew I was scared. But one dude randomly attacked another dude in the cell, and the cops had to come in and pull the guy off of him, and the guy's like all dazed from being punched numerous times. He's like, why would he do that? The cops like, we don't know. And all of a sudden, is he gonna do it to me? Is he gonna do it to me? And so, it was, I realized I'm not fit for prison, and also, I realized I have no songs, and so, whatever my Bible memorization, I'm like, I'm the worst, martyr in history, because I'm useless right now. Without my Bible, everything I thought I had memorized, don't have memorized. No songs memorized. I was completely useless in my 4 or 5 hours in the Addled County jail.
Most people, when they get arrested, they say, yeah, we were singing hymns and spiritual songs.
Yeah.
And you're just there.
Yeah. I was twitchy. Yeah. I thought about doing push-ups, so I was like, that's what you got to do when you're in jail. Push-ups. I was like, I'm going to do some push-ups. And I was like, I'm swinging for the biggest guy on the block. That was the other thing I was thinking. I was like, the big guy comes in, I'm just going to set the tempo. That it's my cell. This is my cell. You don't come in here without a hassle. That's what I was going to do, but I ended up not doing it.
I've watched a lot of ex-prisoners on YouTube. They say that's actually a false thing. Do not swing for the toughest guy.
When you grew up on the 8700 block of Blitzen and Reindeer Heights, that was my neighborhood growing up. And all the streets were named after reindeer. And I was on the 8700 block of Blitzen. You watch these Scared Straight, you're like, I'm swinging for the biggest guy. Apparently bad information. So,
terrible information.
When the whole TV is not telling you the truth.
Unless you want to get beat up.
Yeah, unless you want to get beat up. So that's, the 8700 block of Blitzen was pretty tough, but not quite prison tough. Not cell block 4 tough. So
I think someone's trying to get our attention here.
Do we have an introduction?
Ladies and gentlemen, Amy Robles, you may know him from the internet. And Keith Darrell, you may know him from the 8700.
8700 block of Blitzen. Reindeer Heights.
Well, I'll tell you what, so Matt Williams is supposed to be here, and he's not. He's Skype? No, he can't Skype it.
Yeah. We're a well-oiled machine. We're good.
He had told me, so we were talking a little bit, we were prepping a little bit for this, and he had told me to expect some arguments with you. He said that you had some perspectives on this that were bad, but he didn't tell me what they were.
Yeah, and so so he calls me up, he's like, hey, I heard you got a different take. And we start talking, we're like, we have the same take.
Exact same take.
I'm trying to find a reason to argue with them, and they're like, that's the same basic take. So we're going to sound the same. So what we're going to be talking about, apparently, is does this sound right?
Yeah, I think it sounds good.
Good? Okay, yeah. Woke capitalism, the moral bankruptcy of woke capitalism. So
that's a weird way to say socialism, man.
Yeah, a weird way to say socialism or corporatism or some straight in between. We've probably all seen the increase of kind of woke capital, especially over the past year, be it BLM stuff, be it gay pride, every company, throwing out the rainbow flag and all that sort of stuff. And my first idea that and it was probably going on before this, but as far as me becoming aware of it, if you're over 45 years old, you better get reference. And the reality is, if you are an American, you better get this reference. But if I was to say, Wolverines! What do you think? Red Dawn, yeah, absolutely. So I grew up under Red Dawn, and I couldn't wait. We were growing up in Ranger Heights, and I could not wait for the commies to invade. Like, literally, kill a commie for mommy's shirt. You know what I mean? Like, we would go to the Hartville flea market. We're like, yeah, kill a commie for mommy. Like, so we wanted to get the commies, and we wanted them to invade because of Red Dawn. And we were persuaded that my friends and I were going to go to the Kane Sporting Goods store. We were going to get the place. We're going to go live in the hills. We're going to go kill the commies, just like they did on that. But I think it was like 2010-ish. They did a remake of Red Dawn. And in their remake of Red Dawn, who do they have invade America? Does anybody know? North Korea? Yeah, the Koreans. Like, not China, but Now, why would they choose North Korea and not China? Because there's too much money to be made putting the film into China. And so they had to reorient the film around a tiny little despot in North Korea because of capitalism, because of the ability to make money. And so that was the first time where I was kind of like, corporate America is not necessarily on our side. There's money to be made in China, and all of us are doing business in China with one way or another. So that was my introduction, kind of to the concept of like I didn't have the terminology of woke capital. The earliest reference I could find was an article by Ross Duthot, I believe is his name. In 2018, he made reference to woke capital. But that was my first awareness that businessmen are concerned with their bottom line, and that sometimes means political compromise with communism. So.
Yeah, no, that's definitely part of it. I think so. When I think of woke capitalism, I think of all these companies that are towing these agendas, right? So they're towing the LGBT agenda. I don't know if you guys are on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is a cesspool. And every company will change their logo to a rainbow, whatever month that's supposed to be. And then like clockwork, the next day it goes back to their normal logo, and they're all doing the same stuff. And I'm a recruiter, I'm a tech recruiter, and so some of this wokeness will come into recruiting as well. I'll talk to hiring managers and they'll say, we're really looking for a good software engineering manager, and I'd really love to hire a woman. And so I just kind of look at them strange and say, well, why do you want to hire a woman? And they say, well, we want the best candidate too, but it'd be great if you could find me a woman. And of course I don't do that because it'd be very difficult to find a woman software engineer. Not that they don't exist, but it's a minority. It's just a fact. And so companies are going out of their way to sort of kind of do what the culture is doing, essentially. And it doesn't seem to be a winning strategy. So you're talking about making money. If you're going to waste all your time looking for a woman software engineer, you're going to lose money in that process. So why would a company do that?
Well, because I think in many instances the company is thinking long term. So I'm on a college campus every day, and if you see what's coming down the pike, like when Obergefell came down in 2014, I remember talking to some people, so I'm 45 years old, so some people my age and over, and thinking, oh, well, that's like a watershed type issue. And in my head, even if the ruling came down on our side on Obergefell, we don't have the next generation of people. We barely have the evangelicals who are, say, 25 and under on like the homosexual marriage issue and that sort of stuff. So in my head, it's one of those things that even in their heads as well, if you're a business, you are thinking long term, and your benefits long term is getting the customers of the next generation into your product. And if they are putting forth your values, and even if you think of it as a Christian, you try to maybe purchase things with your values and companies that do stuff like that. And the world's no different. The world is purchasing their values, and I think that's even part of what it is. They're willing to defer the immediate profits, per se, for the longer-term generation of what they see happening long-term in the culture.
Yeah, I read an article, I think I sent it to you, I don't know if you read it, but it was about Goldman Sachs, this investment company. And a few years ago, Goldman Sachs came out and said, we're in support of every company that we invested in having a woman on the board, you know what I mean? And it was very momentous advertisement for their diversity campaign, I guess you could say. Well, the author of this article points out that when they made this announcement just a few months earlier, every company on the S&P had already done this, right? And so he was saying it's a risk-adjusted investment. So they're saying, okay, we're gonna support this after the risk has already passed by. So now they look really good. And they're not risking anything because every company they already invest in has already done this. And so it's looking forward, but also it's risking nothing.
So I think that, it is a safe play. At the end of the day, you see which way the wind blows, and that's part of capitalism. You see which way the wind blows to the consumer, then you serve the consumer. So there's a sense in which, I understand most of us are probably influenced by Van Til to some extent, so I don't want to say there's any true neutrality, but there's a sense in which capitalism is, in a sense, neutral. And so if you have private property means of production, if you're going to serve, say, leftism or rightism, that's somewhat irrelevant to whether or not you have that private property. It deals with what customer do you view valuing your product the most, and if you think it makes the most sense to serve kind of a left-leaning customer, that's what you're going to do. And it's not profitable to come out as a pro-life company in general. Like, whether we agree with it or not, that the overwhelming majority of Americans, even if it's 60%, favor abortion policy. So if you come down hard in that position, it probably is going to hurt you more than the average Christian. I want to read something as we get into this, because for me, as you leave here, rather than just in and of itself talking a lot about capitalism and some of the details, would be more paradigmatic. So when you come across any issue under the sun as a Christian, how do we begin to think through that issue and understand it? And so there's something for me that I read about 15 years ago by a guy named R.J. Rushdoony, if you know who he is. If you don't know who he is, he's worth looking up. If you Google him...
the newspaper was right about you, by the way.
If you Google him, I hope it's a little bit like Googling me. You don't believe what you read about me. That or I just have no self-perception.
I like Rushdoony too, I'm just joking.
Could be one or the other. But he has an opening paragraph in an article he wrote called The Society of Satan. And basically what he puts forward in that article is that we live in God's world. And because we live in God's world, we live with God's categories. And we have to have those categories. And the only question that we end up answering, or how we address those categories, is either in terms of the truth or in terms of a lie. So it's either an idolatrous view of sovereignty or it's a Christian view of sovereignty. And so he says this, and I think it's spot on, and I think it will help you work through really even beyond kind of like woke capitalism to a myriad of issues. He ends up saying this: man is inescapably religious. He may deny God, but all the categories of his life remain religious, and all are categories borrowed from the triune God. Since the only world man lives in is the world God created, his thinking, even in apostasy, is inevitably conditioned and governed by a God-given framework. Men cannot escape that framework. They may deny God's sovereignty, but they cannot stop believing in sovereignty. They merely transfer it to man or the state. Total law and planning, i.e. predestination, is inescapable. Denied to God is simply transferred to the scientific socialist state. And that's what we're heavily seeing. Believe in science. What does that look like? It means handing over sovereignty to the scientific state. Scientific socialist state, which predestines or totally governs and plans all things. If deity be denied to God of Scripture, it merely reappears in man or the state. And if the church ceases proclaiming the gospel, then religion does not perish. It reappears as politics or economics, and salvation continues to be offered to inescapably religious man. Salvation is a necessity of man's being, and the goal of salvation is new life and freedom. If salvation be not accepted in God through Christ, then it is accepted in man, or in order of man, such as the state. And so that's why, when you begin to look at woke capitalism, I hope you begin to kind of view it as a fundamental shift in religious values, comforts, changes, because you have a combination of things. Buy this product and your life is going to be magnificent. You know what I mean? And not only is it going to be magnificent, you're going to be morally righteous by purchasing Gillette razor blades. You know what I mean? You will not serve toxic masculinity. Not only are you getting a great shave and you're being handsome and everything else, but you're undermining the patriarchy in the process. So you get a double whammy, a religious whammy. You get salvation. You're a moral good person. You're on the right side of history. But then on the flip side, you're also serving your values and everything else. So I think when you begin to think through woke capitalism, and if you think of it as these people as putting forward a fundamentally religious view of the world, I think it's helpful to understand what's going on. Because I do want to maintain that these people, it's easy to be cynical to say, oh, they just want $1, and I think in many instances they do want $1. But I also believe that many of them believe these causes. They do believe in equality and anti-racism and these sorts of things. And part of that is they believe these things because it's fundamentally religious in nature. And they haven't escaped religion, but they are breaking forth from Christianity. and that's what we're seeing in our culture.
I think that these companies do believe it to some degree. I think you're right. But if you notice, it's very easy to find inconsistencies in this because it's a fake religion. So it's not like looking at God's law where you're not going to find those inconsistencies. So what you'll see is, I talk about Goldman Sachs again. They're talking about all of these good kinds of causes, LGBT hiring, female hiring, minority diversity, stuff like that. Those are all great. But then they'll turn around and they'll screw over a bunch of Malaysians on a multi-billion-dollar airplane deal. And they don't have a problem with that. So it's like, it's a horrible kind of religious system, but it is a religious system, you're right.
Yeah, and we're seeing that. Think of the adamant protests of, say, something being done in the United States and then turn around and do business with China. China is like a wicked, wicked regime, and yet people, be it Nike, will, roll forth Colin Kaepernick and all these other individuals and offer critiques of America. And there's plenty of reasons to offer critique of America. I'm not up here to defend America. But on the flip side, the NBA, Nike, and stuff like that, they don't say too much about China. Now, why is that? Because there's a lot of money to be had, and the Chinese government is a lot more powerful than whatever American culture that they're actually opposing. So there's radical inconsistencies, and that's even part of the new religion, is who cares about inconsistencies?
Right.
Being inconsistent or being consistent is kind of a thing of small minds. Part of what we do is we have to have these inconsistencies, and that's part of the...
You would never encounter any of that on the campus, would you?
What's that?
You would never encounter that on the college campus, would you?
What I encounter all day, every day. We're an inclusive campus. We include everybody. Get the heck off our campus! So that is literally me on campus every day, 5 days a week, about 12 times a day. I get to hear that part of the language discourse on a regular basis.
There's another kind of more immediate kind of aspect to woke capitalism, and I think it has to do with the coronavirus and these vaccines. Because that's a new part of the religion now, and so companies are mandating these vaccines and willing to sort of let people walk from their company, which seems very counterproductive almost because the employees are, you would think they're being productive, they're making money for these companies, and yet they're still willing to sort of go with this religious system where you must get the vaccine to be a moral person. It's very interesting. To see it happen sort of in real time. And the inconsistencies are here too. My mother works for a major hotel chain at headquarters. And the company is mandating the vaccine for people that work at headquarters. But interestingly, they're not mandating the vaccine for people who work at the hotels. Which is, if it's about health care for your customers, it would be the opposite. But the problem is if their cleaning people walk and their front desk people walk, well, they don't have a hotel anymore. But if the HQ people walk, well, they can probably get by for a little while. You know what I mean?
And a big part is much of this discussion can't escape racial categories, can't escape gender categories. And so if corporate America, and basically the idea that, what's that guy's, Kendi, what's his first name? Ibram X. Kendi. So he says the remedy to past discrimination is current discrimination, and the future for any present discrimination is discrimination in the future. So if you're thinking in terms of egalitarianism, you are willing to hold one group to one standard for a brief season, if necessary, in order to get the economic equality of the outcome. So let's just say that corporate America is made up of 70% white people, and they're going to lose 20% of those people. But over here, the cleaning staff at the hotel is predominantly a Hispanic community. So since they are a minority community, we're willing to kind of, and it's not because they're looking to spread the disease amongst them. If you want to be racist, it's, they're comfortable with us having it. But in their terminology, it would be, we want them to have the economic benefit. So there's a bigger cost imposed upon them who may be suspicious. And if you are a minority in America, you should maybe be suspicious of the government giving you shots. There's
history there.
Yeah, there's not a historic reason that these people would be suspicious of it. And so in their heads, the current discrimination is actually long-term bringing about equality. So even if you sit there initially and think it's hypocritical, the rationale behind it is how do we get to this equality that we're somewhat hoping for, even though they don't really the hard part is these CEOs, be it Steve Jobs, not Steve Jobs anymore, but I can't think of the gentleman's name at Apple, or Jack at Cook, Jack at Twitter. They're not really looking to distribute their own income. You know what I mean? But in their own heads as well, they have that religious component that they need to atone for their sins, and so.
This actually brings us to the good news, because you're saying that, a company like Goldman's looking ahead, they're thinking ahead, so they might take a loss now, but they're expecting to reap a benefit in the future. But the thing is, though, that bigotry there's a cost associated with being a bigot. And it's a heavy cost. And so think of it, if you had a small business and you were a bigot, and you didn't want to hire any black people. So, even though you could, according to all the numbers, you could hire a black person at a cheaper rate. But you're a bigot, so you don't want to work with them, so you'll be willing to pay a higher rate for a white guy. That's because you're a bigot. I mean, you're not a smart man, but you're a bigot. But so there's a cost associated with that, right? You're actually going to lose money for being a bigot. Now, if you take that and you multiply it to a major corporation, right? You're going to lose a lot of money every single time you hire a non-black person in this example. Now, bigotry is expensive in that way if you're a bigot against blacks, but it's also expensive in reverse. So if you're being a bigot against people who don't want to get the vaccine, or white people, or white males, or whatever the case may be, there is a cost associated with that. And so you're actually going to lose, I think, money based on that kind of bigotry, especially with this vaccine. It's very clear to me.
Let me explain how you're going to lose.
So what's going to happen is that there's going to be a certain section of the talent pool that will not work for your company anymore, because they're just not going to get the vaccine no matter what you say. And so now your talent pool is even smaller than it used to be, and your competitors are going to be able to hire these vaccine denying nut jobs at a much cheaper rate, and they're going to, eventually over time, they're going to outcompete you because they were not being bigoted towards these kinds of people. And it's going to be a problem for your company in the end.
But I'm at the place, and you guys are all going to have to make your own decision for your own conscience regarding vaccines. I'm in no position to tell you at all what to do. But I think the average American, and even I think it was Delta, I was reading a thing about Delta, where I think it was 60% or 70% of their employees that said they would not be vaxxed. Once they said, well, you have until September 21st to get vaxxed. And then of those, so of the people who said they would not get vaxxed, like 60 or 70% have been vaxxed at this point. So when pushed, and that's what part with kind of this incremental tyranny, is the costs seem minimal. You know what I mean? Like, you're just kind of like, all right, I'll put on a seatbelt. You know what I mean? What's the big deal? I'll put on a seatbelt. All right, it's just a shot, and everybody's getting it. It seems more healthy. And I think that's one of the difficulties is when you have a family, even Paul talks about having worldly concerns, when you have a family and you have to feed a wife and 3, 4, 5 children, and you're sitting there going, either my $70,000 a year job, or I have to go looking for a job, and who knows what the next 6 months is going to hold, all I have to do is get a shot. I think the left understands power in many ways better than the right, and the power at that point is largely in the hands of the corporation and largely in the hands of people who want to be able to control your life. So I think that's kind of the difficulty. In the ideal free market world and a rational world, it sounds good, but people do need to eat, and children need to eat. When you have a strong cultural current that is adequately headed one way, it's really hard to go against it.
Well, if you were a forward-thinking company, but you're right. Lots of companies won't do it, but some companies will, and those companies will make out like bandits, I think, in the long run. So everyone, of course, needs to make the decision for themselves as well. But the other thing is, for all of you out there, even if your company's not mandating it now, you need to see it coming and prepare yourself so that you're not going to be coerced into it against what you normally would do.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the total side, but just set your family up, like, what does your Christian conscience dictate? What does Christian freedom look like for you? And do the best you can now to prep your family for those things, because, I don't care if you get a vaccine, it's up to you. You're not violating any Christian, biblical norms if you get it or not. But there are probably going to be other things coming down the pike that your company is going to want you to bow down to, that you're going to have to make a more better decision.
Easily. You're going to have to eventually sign that, being gay is the best thing since sliced bread, kind of thing. Like, something like that. That'll happen at a lot of major corps, most likely.
Yeah. Someone else I want to read by, he's a postdoc. It's a pragmatist. His name is Richard Rorty. And I think he's just wrong at this point. And again, it's going to tie into the idea of what's going on more broadly in our culture. He says, relativists like myself agree that the collapse of Marxism has helped us see why politics should not try to be redemptive. But that is not because there is another sort of redemption available, the sort that the Catholics believe is found in the church. It was because redemption was a bad idea in the first place. Human beings need to be happier, but they need not be redeemed, for they are not denigrated beings, not immaterial souls imprisoned in a material body. And I would agree that's not true. Not innocent souls corrupted by original sin. They are, as Nietzsche puts it, clever animals. And so I wanted to set that up in contrast to what Rushmany said. So Ortiz says, we don't need redemption. Rushmany says, you do need redemption. And I would say world capitalism and what we've seen in America over the past year is men and women trying to find redemption outside of Christ. And so whether it's going to a giant BLM rally a year ago and white people are washing feet as like some means of atonement, or handing over money as some means of atonement, everybody knows you need to make atonement. Like Warren Hill, she is from the Fugees, and she goes, everyone knows that they're guilty. Everyone knows that they've lied. Everyone knows that they're guilty. Their conscience eating them on the inside. And if you get to sell people a product because they're guilty, you can make a lot of money. Just make people really, really guilty and say, you buy our product, you can atone. And how righteous will you be compared to your neighbor? And so I think world capitalism understands this psychology better than even many Christians do. And they're tapping into all these elements. You need righteousness. You have a guilty conscience. You do need redemption, despite what Ortiz says. And the question is, how do we bring it about? And woke capitalism is kind of giving you the best of both things. They're kind of giving strands of righteousness and all this sort of stuff. They're giving you a product, making you happy, and you got to kind of have the whole thing in one fell swoop. So I think that's much what's going on with woke capital, is a redemptive aspect that ties into the fundamental aspect of human psychology.
That's it? That's it? Okay. Sounds good. I think it's over. So I guess the question is, though, I think there's a lot of, especially the people that I talk about on my channel, woke evangelicals.
Is that on YouTube?
YouTube, that's right, yeah. They're not woke at all. But there's a lot of evangelicals who would even be concerned that we're even talking about this. Like, this is not really the kind of... I remember one time I had a video where I said, maybe you should think about maybe getting a side hustle, just in case, the vaccine mandates come, and so you have an ability to make money if you have to leave your job. And somebody, commented, said, side hustle? What kind of faith is that? Like, what are you talking about? Don't you just trust God? And he was serious. So why even talk about this as Christians? Is this not a spiritual religion?
I think we need to talk about, because, going back to, in turn, what is the remedy? Because that's even part of what we're supposed to do, is how do we put legs to this? And that's probably the hardest thing with any of this. When you're dealing with the United States government, the Chinese government, Fortune 500 companies, like, you are a tiny little human being,
sure,
with no economic power in any real sense compared to them. And so the difficulty is, how do you put legs to it? I hoot and holler at college students 5 hours a day. So my answer to everything is Jesus. And obviously we're all Christians here, so our answer is Jesus. But I really, I'm convinced it is kind of like what we're trying to do at this conference, is not only getting people to confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, but teasing out the implications. What does that look like? Jesus Christ is Lord, therefore, here's how we ought to live. And it's those two things that we need to be doing left and right. And so if you are not, I would just say, and I don't want to bind anybody's conscience on something like this, but I would just say, in general, if you're not involved in winning your neighbors to Christ, if you're spending your time online moaning and complaining about woke capitalism and blah, 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 and you're not inviting your unregenerate neighbors over to love them and serve them with the gospel, like, that's how we beat Goliath. You know what I mean? Like, we're not going to take out Coca-Cola tomorrow by any stretch of imagination, but you can invite your neighbor over to a meal and discuss the gospel with them. And those are things that everybody in here can do. And if you're sitting there going, Keith, I don't know how to do it, you can probably cook a meal with somebody else that can invite somebody else over. So very practically, the way we end up incrementally, just as they're kind of incrementally violating our rights left and right, the way we incrementally fight back is we love our neighbors, we love our enemies, we pray for those who persecute us, we cook them meals, and we share them the gospel. Because at the end of the day, like, how do you set people free? The gospel. How do you set a guilty conscience free? It's not getting, like, I'm not putting you down if you go to a psychologist, but it's not laying on a couch and confessing the sins of your parents. It's going to the cross and confessing your sins to Christ. That's how you get your conscience free. But our culture, if you listen to them, the sin's always outside of that. And we don't want to be those people that say, oh, we place it in Coca-Cola. Oh, we place it in Nike. The sin is ours, and we go to Christ, we confess it, and we live free people as obeying his commandments. And that's, I think, the incremental way, but we need a bigger vision of what the gospel is, rather than just a simple, I invite Jesus into my heart, I gotta go to heaven now, but we're teasing out the implications of the gospel.
Yeah, so it's an incremental way, but you're not capitulating at any moment. Like you're totally sold out to Christ, even in the small incremental things.
And I think, believe it or not, people are drawn to that. When you have principles, when you stand firm, and people are actually drawn. And I more see it on a college campus with young men particularly. So I'm preaching, and we're kind of, even the other day, the place was kind of going nutty. And as it's going nutty, some young man was just talking all the time, like, how do you keep your focus? How do you not get razzled being out here? And because this is what he expects is going to happen. When I read the book of Acts, and Paul's at Ephesus, and the whole place is yelling one thing, another group is yelling another thing, no one knows why they're there. And I have 200 kids at Colorado State, and no idea why they're there. They just know that a white male's in the middle of campus, and he's a racist, sexist, anti-gay, we got to get him. I can be unflappable in it, because Jesus tells me this is what's going to happen. But what's also being happened is, as I'm hopefully patiently dealing with it, people are being drawn to the gospel. Not because I'm more righteous, because I have confidence in Christ. And because I'm confident in Christ, I can move forward on those things. So even if the initial appeal for many of you is, if we just compromise, then we can win a voice, it's actually the opposite. Don't compromise, and you'll win a voice.
Here's a funny story. So I'm a recruiter, like I said, and I was talking to a hiring manager who was very interested in diversity. And so when I say that we're going to outcompete these people, I'm serious, because listen to how dumb this is. She said to me, and she was kind of in hushed tone, she said, I'd really like to hire a diverse candidate, but like real diverse. And I was like, well, what do you mean? She goes, well, there's a lot of software engineers are Indians, so that's not really diverse. And Asians, it's not really diverse. I was like, but what are you trying to say? Like, who do you mean? I knew what she meant, of course. I mean, she meant a black guy or a Latino or something like that. But I wanted her to say, and she kind of just was like, well, I just like the best candidate. Like, so she's wasting all this time trying to figure out how to say this in a way that's not going to get her called into HR, which she was working from home, so I didn't understand how she would get called into HR. But I think she knew what she was telling me was nonsense. But she does have to spend a certain amount of her day talking about nonsense and thinking about nonsense. And so I really do think that there is some good news here for Christians. You have a healthy profit motive, which we heard from David Bonds, and I totally agree. That's a fine thing to have as a Christian.
Sorry, profit motive. I'm about to get a TikTok channel going. You hear how much money that guy was making on TikTok?
Who did?
The guy, the Netball, Tenball. What was it? He was like 120 grand a month. I'm like, I was doing TikTok. So, profit motive. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to TikTok.
Yeah, I don't go to the comedies, but whatever. So,
Doug Tenable, this is a side note. He kind of looks like Earthworm Jim. His character, Earthworm Jim, he looks like him.
Maybe it's a self-portrait.
It is. Anyway.
Profit motive, sorry.
Anyway, so yes, profit motive is healthy. And the thing is, God wrote into the laws of economics that in order to get profit long-term and sustainable, you have to actually serve your fellow man. You have to actually do things according to his law. So you might get a quick buck as Goldman Sachs, pretending to care about hiring black people or Latinos, because they really don't care about that. What they care about is looking good. And so, and there's many reasons why I say that. It's just proven that they don't care about that. But you can make a quick buck doing that kind of stuff, but it's not going to be sustainable. The good news is, though, that when you treat people without partiality, when you treat people according to how God says you should treat them, and you're in a business, you're actually long-term going to gather it little by little, and it's going to last. Because the Proverbs say, I forget the maybe you know the quotation, but actually you said you don't remember that kind of stuff.
Well, I'm not in jail.
Okay, on stage.
It's cold right now, give it to me.
But it says that
in jail, it's out the window.
It says that profit gathered hastily, it's going to dwindle. But when you gather it little by little, it'll survive. And so, as Christians, when we're building our businesses, we can't be woke, because that's not how God says to treat people. You treat people without partiality, and eventually we will win them. we will win that one. And so, of course, you bring the gospel to people, you preach Christ, but then you also teach them how to live, because the Great Commission has the two parts to it, right? You baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then you teach them to obey everything Christ commanded. And as long as we remember the second part of that, we're going to be good.
Did, we go to 2?
I think so. I mean, I don't know.
But
we started early or late or something.
We're going to go with some Q&A, so I don't know if you want to, because like most of what I want to say, we lost Matt, so we probably have 40 minutes planned.
I'm glad we lost Matt, because you told these people that if they wanted to, it was okay to get the vaccine. You went out and happy.
I'm not here to bind your conscience. You do what conscience dictates.
I say that all the time on my show, and he always looks at me like,
all right, don't get it. That's for Matt. That's not. Matt says don't get it. I say do what conscience dictates.
Matt said on our show, the last time we did the show, that he would rather inject himself with COVID.
Real quick, that was pre-COVID. Matt is now laid up with COVID, so
maybe he did inject himself. But I don't know. Allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. So allegedly that's COVID. So if there are any questions, comments, demands, rebukes, exhortations, we got a gentleman will come around with a mic and we'll get everybody in.
This is the guy that was supposed to introduce us.
To be fair, I was having a great CEO luncheon, which is my job. So,
Hi, thank you for talking about this. My question is, as Christians, how do we deal with the companies that do partake of woke capitalism? Because obviously, it's going to get to a point where we're going to have to grow our own food, make our own clothing. So how do we deal with that as Christians to show, because I know we have to hit them with the dollar. That's the only way that we're going to show our disapproval and our displeasure. But how do we manage on a day-to-day basis with these companies?
I'm going to let you answer this, but funny story. So when I called Keith to talk about this, he says, I'm in Starbucks. It's the perfect place to talk about woke capitalism.
There's like a training flag there and everything. It was like, here's the ideal situation.
But it actually relates to your question, because that's a super woke company, and yet he's in there having a cup of coffee. So what do you
and I also had one this morning. So, what's the thing? I put that steamed heavy cream in there. It's so good. But the cafe yellow, whatever.
They don't have that in there.
So I think that's difficulty, and that's where if you have skills and ability, there is a sense. And Rush Cheney's a guy whose fingerprints all over my thinking, and he was even talking like 40 years ago of, in a sense, trying to build an alternative society. Now, there's a sense in which you obviously need a transition point. If you flew here, you had no choice but to join woke capital and give your money to big corporations and stuff like that. But if possible, start small. And we have to start laying out alternative business. Right now, our life is so intertwined that aside from like very minuscule purchases, it's just inescapable that it's going to those places. And I've thought about it, because like when I'm traveling around on campuses, like getting a hotel, like I know what I'm getting when I go to, say, a Marriott type place, opposed to like a local place where you're like, are there bugs in here? You know what I mean? Like, I go to the mom and pop motel, but there's some roaches in there with me, and so if I go to the Marriott, I know it's going to be clean. So it's really hard because even that's literally part of going to Starbucks. I may not love it, but I know exactly what I'm getting compared to going to a local shop. So I think that's the difficulty, and that's where I think one of the benefits of something like the World Wide Web is we're able to let each other know what we are doing and how Christians are building alternatives. So aside from long-term thinking and us beginning to think through building alternative society, I don't think there's an immediate short-term, aside from trying to make incremental choices and decisions, but you're always going to be hit with that hypocrisy. And that's sometimes where you end up throwing in the flag. You're just like, I can't escape buying, whoever owns everything. You know what I mean? Everybody out there with an iPhone or a Droid, like, you're Google or Apple. Like, you're just doing it. You know what I mean? So you can't be purist on it. And so you just have to pick your incremental balance and go from there.
Yeah, no question about that. I'm in total agreement. So, there are some people that are talking about building this parallel economy. Andrew Torbo from Gab is always talking about this. Building our own payment platforms, our own whatever. That's far out. We still have to exchange money now. We still have to do things now. And so, my biological brother and I have to credit him with a lot of what I do on the channel. He comes up with a lot of the ideas. And he says, look, you just got to do the best you can, right? So if you've got Gmail and you know that they're creeps, and you got Proton Mail, which you're not quite sure if they're creeps yet, maybe you could choose Proton Mail. And is it totally secure? No. Is it totally safe? Probably not. But if you already know that your only other option, and of course there's other options, but your only other options are not good, then you can go with the unknown a little bit if you want to. So you just do the best you can. Doug Wilson wrote an article about boycotting. I don't know if you've ever read that one, but it was
I don't read
interesting.
anything he puts out.
Yeah.
That's Doug Wilson.
You know, for real, I actually don't read all his articles. People always say, you must have read this, right? I'm like, no. Anyway, but his one on boycotting is so interesting because he's not for these blanket boycotts, but he says strategically, there might be one that makes sense. So, you know, if there's a gas station in town and there's only one and they start selling porn, but there's a gas station in the next town and it's a small town, I can see making sense not going to the one that started to sell porn, going to the, you know, taking your time, going out of the way to this other one to strategically force him to stop selling porn. Otherwise, he'll go out of business. That is a unique situation. Like, not doing business with Google or Amazon is essentially impossible right now. But we can pick our battles sometimes, you know what I mean? So we don't have to be purists. If we wait to be purists, nothing will ever happen.
Right here. So this question is more for you, AD. I don't know you, Mr. Darrell. I don't know if you're on YouTube or not. Sorry about that. One comment I'd like to say, just talking about the whole BLM stuff, and I know you're Hispanic and I'm Mexican. I always love telling my friends, like, you know what? I feel kind of left out because no one talks about the Mexicans at all. You know, there's no MLM, you know, no Mexican Lives Matter. So,
And you have multi-level marketing, so you're like, you know, everybody wants to impress you at that point. No offense, you multi-level marketers out there.
The question I'm asking is, what is missing? Because it's more of a entertainment question of, you know, you're on YouTube, and you got the social justice stuff, which you do. You got the kind of in-house issues that Douglas Wilson, a couple like Jeff Durbin deal with. Then you got other political guys like Cross Politic. What else do you think is missing from the YouTube world that maybe you can tell all of us? What would be something that is missing that would be super valuable in the talk of the landscape we see today?
That's a good question, and I don't really know the answer, but I was listening to Marcus Pittman talk about his company that he's starting and some of the projects that they're doing, and it's including stuff like cartoons and like, you know, legitimate documentaries, live action sort of, you know, not Game of Thrones, but like, you know, medieval type stuff with like real Christianity in it. You know, that kind of entertainment where it's not just informational. You know, like I'm doing commentary, right? So, and a couple of music videos. But like the straight up entertainment where, yeah, you're getting a worldview, but it's just you watch it because it's fun to watch. You know what I mean? I think sometimes that kind of stuff is missing. And like a lot of Christian feature films, I would never watch because they're boring. You know what I mean? They're written for a very certain demographic, and I'm not that demographic. You know, so I would say good stuff of the type that you would see on Showtime or HBO, but stuff that's actually good, and no porn and no, you know, gratuitous violence kind of stuff.
I'll weigh in ever so briefly. Carl Truman wrote a book, Rise, Strive for the Modern Self, and then he has a more popular version now. But one of the things he laid out in one of the chapters, I haven't finished the book yet, but one of the chapters that I've read, he talks about the influence of poetry and the influence of story. And I just think that's kind of tied into the idea. If we're telling good stories, that's far more potent to a bunch of people than me. Like, that's one of the things I realize I fail at on camps sometimes. Like, logically and syllogistically, I can outmaneuver the kids, but am I always telling a compelling story that brings them all? You know what I mean? So I think some element of storytelling that shows the beauty of fatherhood, that shows the beauty of a family, like that sort of stuff needs to be told, and we're not doing that well.
Well, people watch my YouTube channel, like, I'm not saying it's not effective, but when they watch, they're already on guard. You know what I mean? But when you're watching a story or listening to a story, your guard is down. And so you're getting a worldview, you're getting a message, but you're not like, you know, it's not like you're walking into a used car dealership, you're already expecting to be sold. You know what I mean? So you're ready to fight. But a story is effective in that way because you're not, you know, expecting to be getting propaganda, even if you are.
Should have time for a couple more here. Start with you, sir.
You mentioned redemption through corporations. Is that why now with every product there's a cause? And with every, even game shows, they want to know who you're playing for. So I'm playing for this cause, we have this thing. It seems like everything has to be linked. I can't just buy razors. I have to buy razors that are going to plant a tree for every razor I buy. Is that really?
Yeah, I think 100% that's
Razor tree.
Yeah, I think that's 100% the case. Like, man is inescapably religious, and we can't. And like going back to that verse, but we can't escape it. And once you reject God, you have to somehow do things to get there. So I was talking with some guys. I was looking at starting a business up in Moscow, and what we were going to put forward was the idea, like a lot of people like, and I don't care if you put 10% of your money to wells in Africa or something like that, but we're going to have a thing. 10% of our profits will go back into our employees. You know what I mean? Like it's not like what's the best thing I can do for Moscow, Idaho, is build a business that employs a bunch of people. Like whereas our tendency is to think, oh, well, if I give 10% away, but even that, how many companies give 10% away, like the basic tithe? They've been influenced by Christianity. They don't realize, oh, 10% of our profits go to this. But that's an easier sell than 10% goes back into hiring more people so we can hire more people and build more. So the people who are alleviating poverty are the small business owners. You know what I mean? The people who are going out creating this work. But that's not. But what's the better sell? We're going to hire more people. Oh, you're a greedy capitalist. Or 10% is going to go to the women's shelter down the street, which may not be helping the women long term. You know what I mean? So that's the sort of stuff anyway. I would say yes, it's fundamentally religious. And once you grasp that and you begin to analyze everything that's going on, people need atonement. How do they atone? And even if you begin to analyze your own life, and I wouldn't necessarily totally encourage you to do it, you'll realize, oh, I do that because I'm governed by shame. Oh, I do that because of atonement. Oh, I do that because of this. And then, all right, now how do I believe the gospel? Now, like he even mentioned yesterday on the TikTok thing, was like, oh, you have shame, Jesus paid for your shame. Are you doing something to atone for your guilt? Oh, Christ's atonement is sufficient. So how can I be free? So in your own life, look at it, but also look at the broader culture. That is what they're doing. I think that's essential to it.
It's such a good point because you're so right that unless there's a cause attached to it, you're not a company doing good for humanity. That's not the case. If you're selling a product that someone will give you money for because they think they'd rather have the product than the money, you're making their life better. And if you do that really well and you make a lot of money, you're doing that for a lot of people. You're making a lot of people's lives better. So having that free exchange is already good for society. And you're employing people, and you're doing all this stuff. And so you shouldn't be ashamed of that profit motive because if you're following God's law, the profit that you get is a reflection of how much you're improving people's lives. Yeah. I remember one time on YouTube, somebody, I was in an argument, if you could imagine that. And somebody tried to insult me by saying, well, you just do that for your audience. I was like, yeah. What are you doing? Yeah, I do this for my audience, right? And they watch it because they think that it benefits their life in some way. I'm not ashamed of that. I don't know why anyone would be.
So I've heard several times throughout this conference, basically this kind of 2-1, which I feel is a little bit disingenuous, where it's like an exhortation to the whole crowd, but then like, oh, but I don't want to bind your conscience. And to me, I'm like, okay, you said that once, but you're not the first person in this conference to say something like that. And I'm just curious, like, I'm not sure exactly where the phrase bind your conscience came from and why we always think that's in all cases a bad thing, as if like we should never try to bind somebody's conscience. That's kind of a preamble to what my question is. In our interpersonal relationships, like, how do we exhort one another, I guess, without binding a conscience? And is binding a conscience even a bad thing at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I say from this standpoint, so I do evangelism, people talk to me, and oftentimes people think, well, do I need to be on campus? And I don't and if you're not evangelizing 5 times a week, you're failing miserably. There are a lot of mothers here who are faithfully raising their children. I want you to love your neighbor, invite people in, but I don't want you thinking, oh, I'm failing as a mother or I'm failing as a Christian because I'm not evangelizing 5 times a week. That's the part where I say, I'm not binding your conscience. Like if the Word of God says, don't commit adultery, I'm going to bind everybody's conscience in here. But when it comes to something more subjective, how much evangelism, like if you have not told anybody the gospel in the past year, you're probably in sin. You know, like, probably. But at the same time, there are life circumstances that would dictate. For me, on the other hand, I haven't done it as much over the past year just due to the nature of the whole system of what's going on. So that's, if I ever make that comment, I always want to qualify it because I interact with people and I preach on campus and I have people come to me all the time who are like, what am I supposed to do? And I don't want them thinking, well, if you're not out on campus preaching, you're being unfaithful in evangelism's way. So that's where I want to make that qualification. Not sure where it comes from. It's probably from like Romans 14 where, you know, whatever conscience dictates, whatever food you're allowed to eat. So there's an aspect of Christian liberty in the context of evangelism I want you guys to have. And so from there, it it is a little bit of a conscience issue.
I wasn't just talking about vandalism, though. Even like, hey, like if you shouldn't get the vaccine.
Yeah.
If you should get the vaccine, you should not.
I think it's the same principle. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is, if it's the matter of the law of God, then you're going to bind consciences all day, because their conscience should be bound by the law of God.
Yeah, it's not free in that context. You're bound to the word of God.
Right. And so what you're saying is, if you think it's a matter of wisdom, or like, I wouldn't get the vaccine, but like God's law doesn't say you shall not get this vaccine, or you can't get it from the good necessary consequence. It's a Westminster thing, I think. Okay, good. I go to a Baptist church, but anyway, then you'll be like, well, then you don't want to bind a conscience, even if you do have an opinion, which I don't know what your opinion is. But.
Yeah, and so it's an issue. What I think is an issue of wisdom. So if I think it's an issue of wisdom, I'm gonna maybe exhort you in a certain direction. We can have that discussion, but in a context where I can't put certain levels and layers on things, I don't want someone leaving here thinking, oh, well, he said go get the vaccine. That's none of my business. Because I feel like if you and your doctor think that's the best thing for you to do, then go and do that. If you think it's the best thing for your family, go and do that. If you're like, nope, I don't trust them, that's fine. You know what I mean? So it's more of those things that the Bible called adiaphora, that we're indifferent towards, that I don't want to push anybody in a way that would end up violating their conscience, especially if things are outside our realm. If you go get sick because they're like, don't get the vaccine, or go get it, and then you fall sick, and that's on that's well out of my wheelhouse. That's what I'm seeking to do.
Hello. In Ron Dreher's 2017 book, The Benedict Option, he makes the case that because of the anti-Christian culture in the world, one of the things that Christians can and should do, and he exhorts all Christian traditions, though he himself is from Eastern Orthodox, is to kind of go back to the traditions they've had and really find out who they are at a deep level. One of the things that seems to, I'm curious as your response to this, given that most of your anecdotes to the woke capitalism is really just more free market, build your own, is blue laws, which were historically in place in America from the time of the Puritans up through the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And we have good statistical evidence to suggest that blue laws did, particularly on closures on Sundays, increase church attendance, particularly with lower classes. And so I'm curious at thoughts, and while this seems kind of like having to get a blue law reinstated, you could actually have a common alliance with the left and sell it for different reasons. So that factory workers and things like that right now are being overworked 7 days a week, 10-hour days, 1 day off, 2 or 3 weeks, could potentially have Sundays off consistently. And I think that's a great way to be a public witness. And then furthermore, on top of that, all it takes is a local sheriff's office saying, we do not do any kind of industry on Sunday, and all of a sudden the Amazon using the UPS mailbox, the mail services on Sundays, which is what they're currently renting out. So it seems like that's a way of using, it's a low-level way of resisting this kind of tyranny. And I'm curious as your thoughts on that, and would you have an issue with that using government in that sort of setting?
Can't speak for Andy, but this is where we might...
He's talking about the Sabbath.
Here's where we might have some differences with one another. I'm not like an ANCAP or, I like reading Mises, if you're kind of like Mises.org. I used to be more in that category, but over the last few years, I'm sold the state has a ministry, and some of that would be to, protecting workers and that sort of stuff. So I'm comfortable with strands of blue law. There's actually, this is a total side. Who's the guy who does the econ podcast? Anyway, there's a podcast called Baptists and Bootleggers, and it's about basically prohibition and how prohibition people would basically back the Baptists who wanted to eradicate alcohol, because it was actually beneficial for them. They were able to make more money based on the black market than it was. So the Baptists out there preaching, being funded. So theoretically, I'm funded by George Soros as I'm out on campus because I'm actually serving his purposes. I'm not funded by George Soros. Anyway, but I would agree with you. I'm for. I think there is a role for the state in shaping. And the reality is, the state does shape us. You know what I mean? Like if the state, I think the state and those in authority, when they come down on a law and a rule, it does shape people downstream. That I think is important. So I would support those laws.
I'll tell you what. So I always am wishy-washy on the Sabbath. I'm always going back and forth on it. But assuming that, let's just all agree for a moment that we should have a Christian Sabbath on Sunday. I would be 100% comfortable with the state taken apart in that.
I mean, what the Supreme Court said that the state is allowed to enforce a day of rest.
Yes.
Even if it breaks, the Jews' holy
Sure.
schedule or something like that.
Sure.
The Supreme Court said it.
And my mom thinks I want to do that to the Jews.
Yeah, so
the
the
camera
answer is-
came in late. There's a joke backing now. I'm not against the Jews.
Yeah, that was a weird one. But anyway, I think it's definitely worth thinking about. That's not, first of all, it's not crazy to be thinking along those lines. And I think that there would be some, if it's godly, we should do it. But there'd also be a lot of pragmatic reasons that it would be good to do as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, if you go back to your church and go back and discuss these things, and how can we practically look at our town, look at our county, and do those sorts of things. When you look at the United States, it's almost overwhelming. You're like, we can do something in Latah County or wherever it is. And so, yeah, get together, discuss those things, and begin to equip the people around you to address that. So, yeah, whether all the particulars are played out or not, I think we all have a similar vision, because we're Christians, of what the world ought to be like. And as we preach Christ, work those things out. That's where I want there to be a lot of Christian freedom on how it plays out.
This is something that even theonomy guys and people that take God's law seriously disagree on. I think it's in Rushdoony's main book, Gary North wrote an appendix not for the Sabbath, which is kind of strange considering what else they talk about. So this is a very controversial issue.
Yeah, Rushdoony would not be a strict Sabbatarian. So,
right.
Any other questions, comments, demands, rebukes, exhortations?
We're actually out of time.
I'm out of time. I'm just getting warmed up. So, fair enough. Thanks, y'all.